3 o'clock this Thursday afternoon. Welcome into the Postgame Show. I'm Elijah Campbell. I feel great. Jay Phillips does not feel great, and that's why he's not here. But I'm not lonely today, because my man, Call Saul, is from the state newspaper. It's Better Call Saul's, but for an entire first hour of the show. Michael's willing to hang out with me from 3 to 4 this afternoon. Michael, welcome to the studio. It's a first-timer.
Yeah, this is crazy. I've never been here. This is pretty cool.
We got a lot of fun stuff going on here. We got like a little video podcast studio we're building out there too. So it's not like completely under construction, but it's cool to get to have you in studio and talk some ball with us for a little bit.
Yes, sir. Let's do it.
You got a busy afternoon too. You're heading to the Don Staley book event.
Yes, I am. Out in past Sandhills, I think. The R2I2 Conference Center. Not entirely sure what that is, to be completely honest with you.
I don't either. Yeah, I wish I could be more help. I wish I could be more help in that regard, but I absolutely am not.
Yeah, that feels like find out what that building is exactly when I get there. But no, it'll be Don Staley's Uncommon Favor book tour stop in Columbia, doing a Q&A with her and I think it's Judge Childs, I believe. I'd have to double check that. Looking forward to being out there and witnessing the Uncommon Favor crowd. I've heard that the last two stops in Philly and New York have been crazy, and I'm pretty sure this one is sold out in Columbia, so it's going to be pretty cool.
Oh, it's going to be nuts. I can imagine. It's going to be pretty populous over there. And then last time we had you on, too, you mentioned that you've been doing some digging into the book, that you made some progress.
Yes.
And that you learned Don Staley, huge Court TV fan.
Yes. I finished the book shortly after our last conversation. I do think that's my biggest takeaway. Is
still okay?
No. I think that was one of the ones because as a person who covers the team and who grew up in Columbia, I feel like a lot of it kind of was common knowledge, but it was cool to get kind of a peek behind the curtain to her upbringing in Philly. And I didn't know that she had turned down the Alabama job in 2005. She talked about that a little bit. Mm-hmm. But I do think the one I think that will stick with me the most is the fact that she's such a big Court TV fan, because it just feels so out of left field.
Wouldn't have guessed.
Yeah,
I wouldn't have guessed.
Have I. Yeah.
Like there. It's not a realm of possibility. It is a factuality that Don Staley has watched Nancy Grace, probably full episodes of Nancy Grace produced content.
Crazy.
And loved every second of it.
What a world we live in.
What a world, man. And you just got done covering the softball team, too. Their run came to an end, and really in heartbreaking fashion, considering how they lost Game 2. And then in Game 3, having, 2 balls fly to the warning track in the 6th inning, when if one of those goes over, you at least tie. If both of them go over that fence, you have a lead going into the last inning. Mm-hmm. Tough way for the season to end. I think from your perspective, too, just being at the ballpark, covering this team during this run, how much do you think that second game kind of contributed to what we saw in Game 3, where they had a hard time hitting the ball early on?
I think to an extent it probably did. I know after Game 3, Ashley Chastain Woodard straight up said, we tried to flush everything from that heartbreaking Game 2 loss. And she came into it saying, going into breakfast the morning of Game 3, she said that she had felt they're good. Like they had washed the loss and everything and were good to go. But I think, you look at the box score, I think it was 2 hits from South Carolina in that game. You're not going to beat a UCLA team with just 2 hits. And I think that, that obviously played a factor. They couldn't get anything going on offense, and you get shut out for one of the first times, if not the only time that season.
Yeah, that didn't happen often.
Yeah. So I think that played a big role in it. It's one of those things where it stings knowing that you were essentially an out away from the first College World Series appearance
since the expansion of the format.
Yeah, since 97, so nearly 30 years. I do think there's a whole lot of positive momentum. The atmosphere of the ballpark was crazy. I wouldn't say the only negative aspects of that entire experience of covering that postseason team was the walk-off home run to win Game 2 by UCLA. You talk about feeling the air sucked out of a crowd. Just the second that ball came off of Jordan Woolery's bat, it went silent. But I think it was really cool to kind of see that program being reinvigorated by Ashley Chastain Woodard. Obviously, National Coach of the Year, Ashley Chastain Woodard.
Yes. So, somehow not SEC Coach of the Year. It's not good enough for the SEC coaches to give it to Oklahoma, who does this every year.
Yeah.
And I was even talking to Jay yesterday, towards the end of the show, how strange it is, in a year in which the team that got picked last going into the season, plays well enough to get a top 8 seed, to be able to put themselves in a position to host a super regional, a team made up of a lot of transfers. I mean, that's the one thing on the TV broadcast that they hammered home, was that they have more transfers than any team in Division I, and being able to utilize all that to get to where they did and have to play a criminally underseeded UCLA team just to get that far. I just don't know how you don't give it to Ashley Chastain Woodard, especially considering Oklahoma wasn't even the number 1 overall seed, which I think by Oklahoma standards might be underperforming your expectation.
Yeah, I think you're making a whole lot of sense.
Too much.
Unfortunately, it might be a little too much.
Too much. Too much sense. Too much sense going into it.
Yeah.
But I couldn't help to think, too, once that Game 3 ended, really, my initial thought, it's the first thing that popped into my head was, I think they'll be back.
Yeah.
Like, I think that this is incredibly sustainable. You look at the landscape of college athletics, this is true for softball, basketball, football. I mean, you're going to have to be able, maybe not rely on transfers as much, but you got to be able to use the portal as a tool.
Yeah.
You've got to be able to relate to these kids. And my favorite thing about listening to her after the game was just how deeply like this loss stung because of how close she was to those players. And some of those players, it's her first time getting to coach them, but she already established what genuinely felt like a pretty deep connection with her team. And in today's college athletics, with so much roster turnover, can be hard to do. But all of that kind of just reinforced my thought of, you're going to lose a lot going into next year, but you get a lot coming back, a lot of key production, especially from the pitching circle. I think there's a lot to build on, and I have a really good feeling that we do see them in Oklahoma City within 3 years.
Yeah, I think if she can work the portal like she did this coming into this season, that they'll be fine and they'll be right back where they were. And if you think about it too, the transfers that they brought in, 6 of them came with her from Charlotte.
From Charlotte,
I mean, these are like hidden gem type players. I mean, Ariana Rhodey was an All-American by Softball America last year at Charlotte. Was a Gold Glove this year. At Carolina, Lexi Winters was putting on a phenomenal performance in the postseason. So it's one of those things where I feel like if she can have like a fraction of the hits out of the portal that she did from just the 6 that she brought with her, then I feel like they'll be fine. But I do think they lose a lot of experience, so she's going to have to do some work in the portal. I mean, I was looking at it, I think she lost the entire left side of that infield and 2 outfielders and one of your 2 aces in the pitcher circle. So there's going to be a lot of production to replace. But I mean, again, if she can hit on a fraction of the transfers that she brings in, they'll be just fine.
And I loved the identity they had this year, too, as just a great fielding team. Like, that team just didn't beat themselves. It's not like they're striking out 12, 13 batters every game, right? Like, I mean, the pitching did a really great job of forcing soft contact, but the fielders behind whoever is in the circle, whether it's Jory Hurd or Sam Gress, like, I mean, it's one of those things, like, you felt really good about anytime the ball was put in play, they were going to make those plays, and they just weren't going to beat themselves. And I think being able to teach that fundamental aspect of the game at least just heightens what your floor is.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. They had a former Gold Glover in left, a soon-to-be Gold Glover at first. You had Ella Chansey at third, who, she's a senior, won't be back, but had at a certain point the Supers was kind of struggling at the plate, but was just flashing the leather at third. I mean, it's to your point. It is they are built on a fundamental level to succeed, and I would not be surprised if they're right back next year.
Oh yeah, but an incredible season for Coach Ashley Chastain Woodard and the Gamecocks in year 1. I think we're both in agreement that they're going to be back.
Yeah,
we have a whole lot to get into today. A lot of college football playoff discussion. Is the SEC going to move to 9 games? That's a hot button of discussion in Destin this week with the SEC spring meetings. And then, of course, the NBA playoffs as well. Michael, did you think at the beginning of the season that a team that the average age of the player is 24 years old was going to not only win 68 games in a regular season, but breeze through the Western Conference?
No.
I didn't at all.
No, not at all.
I figured they'd beat Minnesota, too. I just didn't think they would do that to Minnesota.
Yeah.
And it even speaks highly that the Nuggets were able to push them to 7 games.
Exactly.
That's going to be the toughest bit, but my God. Watching that game last night, just watching how good that team is at forcing turnovers, people like rip on the NBA for saying that nobody plays defense. You haven't watched the Oklahoma City Thunder.
Correct.
Because that might be the best, but maybe the best perimeter defensive teams I've seen in my life.
Yeah, a bunch of casuals saying there's no defense. Watch a game. Watch the game. They're phenomenal. They fly all over the place. Yeah.
But you think the Pacers in it tonight?
You know what? I think they do. I don't know. There's just like a whole lot of magic that like I feel like could happen with the Knicks, but also as a Celtics fan, I would love if both teams could lose, but also
if both teams can just not make it to the finals, and they resummon the Celtics.
I think the Pacers probably get it done tonight, though. To your point,
I do deserve an award for having a Celtics fan in the studio. As a Laker fan, this is the tolerance award that I should be receiving here anytime soon.
So graceful.
Jason Tatum, though, that was brutal, man.
Brutal.
Gonna pretty much miss him all of next year unless there's just some like super recovery with that Achilles. But
I'm just banking on him not being available next year.
No, but the team should be good enough, I guess, all around to be able to at least make yourself a 4 or 5 seed and then make something happen in the playoffs.
I think it depends on if they make moves, because I think there's a school of thought that Kristaps Porzingis and Drew Holiday might not be back.
Which would be tough.
Yeah. So it kind of depends on, I mean, there's like fully a way where, if they ship off a couple pieces, might be a late lottery team at the absolute worst.
Yes.
The absolute worst. Now it depends on, I guess, what you get back in that kind of gap year between when Tatum gets back, depending on what you send off and what you get back and everything. But who knows?
Yeah, brutal to see that go down for him. And the Celtics are, that's the one thing about the NBA right now, too, the way they've structured the salary cap now, the whole second apron stuff, which don't ask me to explain.
Yeah, I wish I could understand all that.
Because I'm going to look like Charlie Day in It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia with all the string and stuff in the background on the marker board and acting crazy. That's how I feel like I sound when I try to even describe it. But when you're paying as much as you are to guys like Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, as you should, those are all NBA players, and one was the MVP of the finals last season. They won you a championship. I mean, that's something you should just do. But that does make paying the harder guy or the role players even more. And Drew Holiday and Kristaps are probably two of the best role players in the NBA in terms of just sticking to that role.
I mean, Drew Holiday made $30 million this year. He'll make $32.4 next year, $34.8 the next year, and then he has a $37.2 million option when he turns 37. If I'm a 37-year-old, I'm not turning down
$37 million. No, I'm not turning $37 million down at age 30 right now and not playing. You give that to me, I'll play whatever you want. I'll be your water boy for that much. I'll do whatever you possibly have for that amount of money. But before we hit the break here too, I don't know if I've even said this on air. Drew Holiday, NBA Hall of Famer. I don't know if people think that's too spicy, but I would vote that guy in today.
Yeah, as a Celtics fan, that's fair.
Won 2 titles, arguably the best defender on both of those titles.
Yep.
And when you saw him leave Milwaukee, we saw what happened.
6-time All-Defensive.
Yeah.
2-time All-Star. 2-time Sportsmanship Award.
See, it's the friends you make along the way, and Drew Holiday has made a ton of friends. And after last summer, Olympic gold medalist.
Exactly.
And he was out of all the Celtics guys, he played the most. Played the most. Him and Derek White played the most in that gold medal run. So I think Drew Holiday. You give me a vote, I vote that guy in. I think the impact he gives, for any given team, is what wins championships. Really good role players win championships. We'll go take a quick break. My man Michael Saul is from the State newspaper in the studio with me up until 4. Jay and I talked about it a lot yesterday. Scheduling in the SEC is going to have to change, maybe to 9 games, but I think that's also going to be contingent on what the playoff looks like. We'll get Michael's thoughts on what a future playoff format looks like and whether or not it's beneficial for the SEC to add that 9th game in the regular season between conference teams. All of that and more. A very busy Thursday postgame show.
coaches actually today talked with me about that importance. And they talked about, I'll call it a 5-11 model a lot with me, and our own ability to earn those berths. So we like yesterday, I don't think there was a lot of belief that we were interested in looking at models. Today, I think represented exactly what I share. And we have had conversations today about the meaning of a conference championship still being retained. So I thought those were good things. And yesterday when I was asked, I said, look, doing away with that's not like anywhere near the top of my agenda with the issues we have.
That was Greg Sankey yesterday at the SEC spring meetings, talking about maybe the importance of keeping an SEC championship along with a 5+11 college football playoff model. It's a big topic of discussion that we hit on yesterday a lot. Yesterday, Jay and I mostly talking about maybe the 9-game SEC schedule and the preference of maybe not including FCS teams in that schedule, but maybe looking for something more uniform for everybody to be able to follow. Michael Saul is from the state with me here for this first hour. And Michael, first, before we even get into like the scheduling aspect of it, like the playoff itself is kind of really the first domino to fall, it feels like, for any type of future scheduling commitments. I think these conferences want to see exactly what the format is we're playing with here. You've seen a lot of them floated around. Greg alluded to that 5+11 model where the 4 P4 conferences get an auto bid for their champion. The highest ranked power or group of 6 school now getting that bid, and then just 11 at-larges to be discussed at the end of the season and seeded appropriately. We've also seen the auto bid model where the SEC gets 4, the Big 10 gets 4, the Big 12 gets 2, ACC gets 2, and then you have other at-larges. And then Lane Kiffin the other day just said, how about we just take the 16 best and seed them? End of story. When we hear all of that, has any of those made the most sense to you?
I don't know if it's made the most sense, but I certainly never thought I'd be sitting here saying that I agree with Lane Kiffin on something.
It is a cold day in hell, yes, because I feel the same way.
But, it was one of those things where you kind of open Pandora's box when you start the playoff, and then after, a decade and some change of doing 4, it's like, oh, well, let's expand it. And then, you have expanded to 12, and now 12 isn't enough, or the way that we got to the 12 isn't enough. I don't know. I feel like part of me just wants to say, hey, let's just do 25 and do the last top 25 rankings and just throw them all in there. Or we can do what Lane says and do the top 16. But I agree with, I think Brian Kelly said it the other day, he wants to wait on the SEC scheduling until after a playoff format has been picked. Yes, you should obviously do that. But in terms of the playoff format being selected, I genuinely do not have a strong enough opinion on any of it, because it feels like what is the leading suggestion, or just the suggestions plural in general, is constantly changing every day. That I'm just like, you guys go make that decision. I'll be here. I'll adapt whatever you need me to do.
Whenever you're ready.
Yeah, I think the only one that I have kind of somewhat of a strong feeling about is the 4 for the SEC, 4 for the Big 10. I don't like that, because then, they might as well just break off at that point and have their own playoff. That's what they're going to do. But I'm not a fan of that. But, I don't make those decisions.
very anti 4 auto bids for 2 conferences and then giving away 2 to others. Because, to me, college sports are just too cyclical to be, before a season starts, say, all right, this league is guaranteed to have this many teams in. Mm-hmm. This league is guaranteed to have this many teams in. These 2 leagues will have 2 fewer than they do, because who knows? It's not, every now and then the Big 12 can produce some teams that, multiple teams that are really good and deserving of getting in the playoff. In some years, the SEC isn't as good at the top, or it is very cyclical. Yes, the SEC is the best conference pretty much every year, right? I think we could pencil that in.
Yeah.
But at the same time, too, it runs counter to everything that we value in sports in terms of just proving it on the field. I think college football's biggest issue over the last decade, or even longer, actually much longer, not just decades, has been that the sport can sometimes be a beauty pageant. We used to determine a national champion by the AP poll vote every year until 1998, right? And then we started settling on the field a little bit. But at the same time, when it comes to fielding, 4 teams, it becomes a beauty pageant of sorts, right? Sometimes decisions were made for ratings purposes and not exactly what is reflected on the field. And I think maybe the biggest domino to fall there was an undefeated Florida State team getting left out because they had 2 quarterbacks hurt, right? So I hate the automatic assigned number of bids for different leagues.
Correct.
That's my biggest no-go.
Yeah.
I'm really cool with, having automatic qualifiers for championship games because I, for one, and I don't know if I'm the only one here, that still highly values a championship game in a conference. Like a conference championship game should still matter. Yeah. And I think once we get to the point, if we have auto bids, we might water down the product of what Championship Saturday is going to be because we have other teams trying to play their way in as well. I just don't think that works, and I think it just diminishes what the SEC championship game is supposed to be.
Yeah, I think you get a little crazy and just do, what is it? It's P4, so it's group of 6 now.
Yeah.
You can just take all the conference champions from those, and that's your playoff. No at-large, just conference championship games, just the conference winners, and just do it that way. Now, no one's going to be happy about that because you leave out like a 2-loss Georgia or like a 1-loss Georgia or something like that. But no, there's no perfect answer to this. We're going to be debating it forever. Whatever ends up being picked is not going to satisfy anybody. No. It'll probably change again in the next 2 years after we change it again this time. So I'm very much, all right, y'all make that decision. I'll be here when you're done.
I'm just longing for the stability, right?
Yes, exactly.
Like 12 was fine. I had no problem with 12. And if you wanted to change the seeding because of what happened last year, I can concede that we would have gotten better matchups if you just went to the straight seeding model to begin with. But I don't fault anyone for wanting to maintain the value of winning a conference championship.
Correct.
I think trying to preserve a lot of the things in college football that make college football special and unique, making it different from the NFL, I think still is worth trying to preserve.
Absolutely.
But the sudden change to 16, I knew, I'm not naive. Like, I knew we were going to get to 16 eventually.
Eventually, yeah.
Right? But I'm now at the point where we're just like in such a weird limbo spot of trying to determine what we're going to do on a year-to-year basis that eventually we just need to stick to something and keep with it. That way it's just not a constant point of discussion as to what the postseason's even going to look like.
Yeah. That's just not going to happen ever.
It's not. Too much money.
What a pipe dream, right?
That is.
Stability.
That's some real pie in the sky thinking from my point of view here.
Yeah. No, that's never happening. I wish that I agree with you. That'd be so nice, but here we are.
And then when it comes to like the 9-game schedule too in the SEC, I think the one thing that like Jay and I have poked so much fun at Mark Stoops for saying, if you play 9 conference games, we might not be able to play Louisville. Yeah, you can still play Louisville. Like, don't be scared of Louisville football. Yeah. All right, like Lamar Jackson's not walking through that door. He can't hurt you anymore.
Yeah,
right. Like the scary man can't hurt you anymore.
Yeah.
But for me, it's not even just about reflecting in the college football playoff resumes and the big picture of just determining, or giving people more sample size. Like when you're determining a conference championship, and it sounds like from that cut too, that Greg Sankey still wants to preserve the SEC title game because that's been a cash cow for the conference since they instituted it.
Yeah.
But it gives you a better reflection on who your true champion is. As of right now, you only see half your league.
Yeah.
If you add one more game, you just get a larger picture. And like, look, we were a bad start of the game away from Texas A&M being in the SEC championship, despite being 3 losses and being like, 4 or 5 spots out of the college football playoff picture.
True.
And knowing what we know now about the emphasis on those conference title games specifically by the committee because they let SMU in despite losing to Clemson. And I firmly believe the reason they let them in was because they already determined if you're in these conference championship games, the conference title games can't hurt you.
Yeah.
So, knowing that, and knowing how close A&M was to being a 4-loss team in a 12-team college football playoff, it probably behooves this league to get as many faces squaring off against each other as possible to just create a true champion.
Yeah, I go back and forth on whether it should be 8 or 9, simply because I love the early non-conference matchups, but because they do scheduling 10 years in advance, they don't always hit.
Right.
And also, I think I very much look at it from I'm running my EA Sports College Football 26 Dynasty. Like, all right, I want 8 SEC games because I want to schedule I want to schedule Oregon, Ohio State, Notre Dame. Like I
have all the fun in the world.
I want 3 crazy non-conference matchups, but unfortunately, that's just not how this works.
No.
So I think there's also the factor of it. If you go to 9, you look at some of the middling, lower, with the SEC specifically, some of those middling to lower end programs in the SEC who are like, maybe we don't want that extra game that now we have to play Alabama when we weren't having to play Alabama kind of deal.
Right.
And they could get an extra win, closer to bowl eligibility with playing a G6 team group or whatever it is, or an FCS team or something like that. So I think I'm not speaking from a point of intel on it, but I feel like there's probably some division just within conferences themselves in the sense of, no, we don't want an extra conference game, especially in the SEC, but I don't know.
The schedule's going to be a bear one way or another.
Exactly.
It's going to be a bear for South Carolina this year.
Yeah.
And we come back, we'll discuss what Bill Connolly's SP Plus rankings before the season starts say about this team. And if that defensive projection comes true, can we see the Gamecocks in the college football playoff? Michael and I will discuss when the postgame show returns. Bill Connelly's SP Plus rankings, or his computer model, has released the post-spring top 25. And South Carolina sitting at 17. But that's not the fascinating part here. That's not the part that caught my attention when I saw this a couple weeks ago and I talked about it with Alan Cole on this show. Or that was last week, actually. Time flies when you're having this much fun. But it wasn't the overall ranking. It was that he's got the South Carolina defense at 15 specifically, and the offense at 24. Now, clearly, you bring back the best edge rusher in the country with Dylan Stewart. You've got one of the best quarterbacks in the country with Lenora Sellers. But the big question marks are how you fill in the gaps on defense, because you just got done sending some dudes to the National Football League. They had their names called during the NFL draft. Michael Saul's from the state with me right now, along with his duties covering the women's basketball team and the softball team and the run that they just had. You're in Williams-Brice on Saturdays, too. You follow along with this team. You cover this team pretty well. When you hear the words, a projection for this South Carolina team being the number 15 defense in the country, despite all they lost, and knowing what they have coming back on offense, what does that say to you about what the actual ceiling of this 2025 group can be?
I feel like it's almost expecting the defense to be as good as it was last year, if not better. Obviously, you've lost, as you said, a lot of guys with the draft. But, I mean, I think we've seen from a development standpoint that Beamer and his staff have been able to put good defenses on the field, and they've been able to produce. So I don't feel like it's necessarily a stretch, maybe is the word I'm looking for, to assume that this defense, despite the fact that, yes, they did lose some pieces, could come back and maybe replicate or find, a healthy fraction of the production that it was able to put on the field last year.
Yeah, that's the big thing, too. If you can get a couple of guys at linebacker, to me, that's really the position that I'm most fascinated in, is can you get somebody who kind of replaces the ranginess, or can at least, even in the aggregate, replace the ranginess of a Debo Williams or Demetrius Knight? Or can you get one of the guys coming back, whether it's Desmond Umeozulu, Brian Thomas Jr., to be that Kyle Kennard-like player off of the edge, opposite of Dylan Stewart? We saw exactly what that did for Kyle. Kyle came in here already a polished pass rusher, but it's amazing what happens when you can get paired with someone like Dylan Stewart, who's going to get all of the attention from the opposing offense in terms of double teaming, chip blocking, and going into max protection for many snaps, and almost every drop back you can have, because you don't want that guy wrecking the game for you. If you just get a couple of those guys on the other side to be productive and take advantage of one-on-ones, like we're talking about this South Carolina team replicating what it did last year and maybe even better, really kind of depending on what happens in the margins in close games.
Yeah, I think to your point, I agree. You kind of need almost like a number two to step up. But also at the same time, you don't want Dylan Stewart to kind of have a sophomore slump, I guess.
Yeah, that's true too.
Because, I mean, if you have that, it's all right. Well, now all the attention was on him, and he's not really doing anything for us, and now we're just all kind of on the same playing field. And I think you want him to continue to, add on to his success from last year, continue to grow and develop. But yeah, I totally agree. If you can get a number two almost, or number two and number three to kind of develop on, not even just on the literal other side of the line of scrimmage across from him, but just anyone else in that defense to kind of step up and be able to take some attention off of him, I think that defense finds success.
And I like the back end too. I mean, when you look at a lot of the guys returning, you're excited with what Judge Collier brought you at times last year. You know what you get from Jalen Kilgore, who is seemingly just getting better and better with each year. And this is a year that we can see Jalen see his name called in the first round of the NFL draft, just given, trajectory. He had some really big moments last year. And then I think my favorite transfer portal addition was getting Brandon Cisse from NC State, a guy who's a lockdown corner who can play multiple positions, whether it be on the boundary or playing at nickel. You can shift these guys around a little bit. I think once they find out where everybody fits best in that secondary, I think the secondary might end up being the strength of this team, or defense at least.
Yeah, you want the back end to be strong in any team, not just South Carolina, but in football in general. So, yeah, I remember the days of Stephon Gilmore and everything. You're never going to be able to replicate a guy like that, but you want your DBs and your safeties to have success, because I mean, if something gets over the top, no matter how good your D linemen are, if they're getting to the quarterback, no matter how good your linebackers are, if they're getting the quarterback, if the wide receiver's open every time, the guy's a split second to throw the ball, you're out of luck there. So yeah, I think to your point, Kilgore and Collier, Cisse was a great addition to the secondary, so I'm excited to see how they do.
Yeah, love it. And then offensively, too, I mean, right now, Bill's SP Plus model has them being the number 24 offense. And I think that's a possibility, but I think they're closer to like 15 than the defense is to 15, just because what you have with Lenora Sellers at quarterback, and you just brought back so many weapons to guys who got better throughout the year. I think it's incredibly encouraging what we saw from Nick Harbor at the end of the regular season, and then getting to spend the entire spring with the team. I think that holds immense value right there. Really, I think just the biggest question mark is, what does the offense look like under Mike Shula as the offensive coordinator instead of Dow Loggins? And if there is any type of growing pains with getting acclimated with the offense, I can't imagine that Mike changes a ton with what Dow did with this group last season.
Yeah, I feel like especially where Lenoris is in his development, you don't really, I feel like, want to tweak with that all that much. But I also feel like, kind of to play devil's advocate to myself, you have a guy who is experienced who could maybe, deal with those changes at least at the quarterback position. I think the offense, the one thing I want to look forward to is the running back position and kind of what goes on there. How, Oscar Attaway, you look at the stats from last year of Rocket Sanders and Lenora Sellers, your top two rushers. You're not bringing one of those guys back. And as much as, yes, Lenoris can give you production on the ground, you don't want to rely on your quarterback to set the pace on the ground. So
you don't want to run the ball 18, 19 times a game.
No, you don't.
You have to keep them fresh.
Yeah, exactly. So
what happens when you run the ball, you get hit.
Yeah.
You don't want them getting hit.
Yeah.
It's way too valuable. But the Rasul Faison thing to me is still incredibly frustrating because you file the paperwork back in January. I think if Rasul Faison's cleared to play and he plays for the Gamecocks next year, I think he, with the benefit of having such a good mobile quarterback in Lenoris, and I like what they did on the offensive line. I think they added some real depth and versatility, which is almost equally important to be able to have guys that can play multiple positions. One kind of helps the other. But I think the offensive line's in shape right now to where you can establish a pretty good ground game without an excessive amount of talent in the backfield. But with the way Rasul Faison runs the ball and Oscar Attaway has a change of pace, I think you have maybe your ideal backfield with what you have around those guys. But if Rasul can't play, then we're going to have to see Oscar Attaway end up being the leading rusher for a team, or at least the leading carrier for a team, and he just hasn't had the chance to do that yet in his career.
Yeah, I think I pulled up Jordan Kay. Shout out, coworker at the State.
Yes,
pulled up his article
plug
because I know he wrote about this. If it was not this morning, yesterday, I was like, oh, the second you brought it up. No, I mean, I think if Faison doesn't get cleared or whatever is happening there, you've got 4 scholarship running backs, and so I mean, it gets a little tricky. I feel like there's obviously whatever the contingency plan is for Beamer and his staff, they've got that under wraps and have it, in their back pocket. But I feel like you don't even want to have to get to that contingency plan.
No, absolutely, because you love what you got right now, and that's what you recruited in the offseason for, was to get what you have right now. So that's the big thing for me, like for this offense. I mean, if Rasul's cleared, I feel amazing about the offense already.
Yeah.
To me, the biggest X factor is how do you replace all that production on defense? And if Bill's computer model is right and you have the 15th best defense in America, we're talking 9-3, I think, or even 10-2.
Yeah.
And you're putting yourself in a position to make the college football playoff, which everybody here would be incredibly excited about. What I'm excited about, usually we do J or nay, and usually it's at 4:45. But since we have Michael only for the 3 o'clock hour, we're going to do Saul's or y'all's. Is this a Michael Saul's take or is this y'all's take? And he's just distancing himself from it.
Oh, Lord.
So we will have Michael's debut of game show music type segments here on the Postgame Show when we wrap up hour number 1.
Beautiful.
Final segment here of hour number 1 of the Postgame Show, our last segment with my man Michael Sauls from the State newspaper at MC Sauls on Twitter. Hit him up with a follow. Check out his work at the State. A lot of good stuff going on.
Thank you.
Big fan.
Appreciate that.
Big fan. Big fan. But a big enough fan to have Michael participate in a segment, a game show themed segment. Usually we do Jay or Nay, where I give a take to Jay, and if he agrees, he says Jay, and if no, Nate. Pretty self-explanatory. But today it's Sauls versus Y'alls, and I'm the y'all because these are Elijah Campbell takes right here. So he'll say if he agrees, it's a Sauls take. If it's not, it's Y'alls take. So you hear that music, you know what time it is. We're putting Michael on the spot. Sauls or Y'alls, Michael? For the second straight year, the Alabama Crimson Tide will miss a 12-team college football playoff.
It's gonna bite me in the butt later this year, I feel like. But I that's a Sauls.
A Sauls? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing with Alabama, too. Like, you look at all of the positions on the field, especially on defense, and they're loaded, right? Ryan Williams, for the first half of last year, you'd have thought won the Heisman with how he was playing, and there's not a broadcast on the planet that wouldn't have gone without mentioning he was only 17 years old at the time.
Yeah.
And we all remember the play he made to beat Georgia.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm sold on the quarterback situation or the running game. I don't know if they have enough playmakers at running back to make me feel like that's a legit contender. But if Ty Simpson is developed, because he's waited his time.
Yeah.
That man has spent a lot of days practicing for Alabama without getting to play for Alabama. But if he's that good, then I can see it.
Yeah, I can get down with them missing. Like right now, I can agree with that. Now, maybe week 2 and they look like an entirely different team after beating like ULM or something. maybe
right.
I'll be
when they drop the hammer on some poor G6 team. Yeah, they start the season this year at Florida State.
Yes,
I believe
at FSU, ULM week 2, Wisconsin 3. Then they're off.
Which is, I mean, man, Florida State and Wisconsin, I don't know what those guys have back this year. Wisconsin's going through all types of changes.
Yeah.
And Florida State just brings in a new roster every year.
Yeah. I couldn't tell. I don't think I could name a player on either of those teams, to be honest with you. So much turnover. I was locked in on FCS football last year, my last job. So
you were locked in.
Yeah.
Oh, man. FCS football's fun. The original great playoff format.
They should just adopt that. Going back to the beginning of the hour. They should just adopt that.
They should just take what the FCS has done and use it because they don't complain about that at all. Sauls or Y'alls? The team best built to win the College World Series from the SEC is Arkansas.
Are we talking? We're talking baseball, right? We're not talking softball. I just always loved Vandy. So
they're loaded.
I've got this gut feeling that Corbin's going to get them back to the mountaintop. So I guess that's a y'all.
Yeah.
Yeah. Give me Vandy. Give me the Vandy boys.
I don't like betting against Tim Corbin. Yeah. I don't. I mean, I love this Arkansas team. I'm infatuated with how they've been hitting the ball this year. Yeah. But
anchor down. Go Doors.
Go Doors. That's right. Man, but like that pitching staff, man. Starting and bullpen. Like that's... I thought it was either Vanderbilt or Arkansas, but I've been on the Arkansas bandwagon for like a month and a half now. Can't leave now. Sauls or Y'alls? The SEC will find a way to make South Carolina and LSU play home and homes in the regular season next year in women's basketball. Now that Mylasia Fulwiley is an LSU Tiger.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised by that, Sauls. Yeah,
I kind of hope it happens.
Yeah, I think it probably will happen.
I think they should do it anyway, just because those are been the two best programs over ever since Kim took the LSU job.
Last 4 to 5, yeah.
Yeah, last 4 to 5. Those have been your two best programs, and LSU's yet to beat South Carolina, but...
I think you probably have to switch it back and forth between, if Texas keeps playing the way that Texas played this year and everything, I think you probably have to switch it back and forth between maybe Texas and Carolina and LSU and Carolina. But I think, especially now that Fulwiley is at LSU, you kind of have to leave. If you want to, talk about making everything a beauty pageant, you want to talk about TV ratings, yes, LSU.
Michael Sauls, thank you for coming into the studio, man. Always good to chat with you. Good stuff. Again, follow him at MC Sauls on Twitter. Hour number 2 coming up next. Hour number 2 of the Postgame Show starts right now. Another big thanks to my pal Michael Sauls from the State newspaper for hanging out with me for an hour. It can get kind of lonely in here if you're doing a show by yourself. Get tired of hearing your own voice. This is good for Michael to come in here and hang out with me for a little bit. Always follow him on Twitter at MC Sauls, and then follow along with his work at the State. And him and Jordan have done some fantastic work covering this team throughout all seasons, football, basketball, baseball. They do a fantastic job. Jordan, even today, tweeted SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey making some closing remarks at the SEC meetings, and he said all field/court stormings will cost the home team $500,000 now. There will be no more escalating scale from $100K to $250 to $500K. Now, essentially, you storm the field once. No matter if you've done it in that school year prior, it's a $500,000 fine. Again, I don't know how policeable that is or if it's the school's fault, I don't think they're willing to, or be able to hire enough security staff to make sure all thousands of the students in attendance for these games stay off the playing surface. I don't know how good of a deterrent $500,000 of a fine would be for kids who have been enjoying themselves at a sporting event and watch their team just pull off a big upset. Good luck. That's all I got. Good luck, Greg, for having that one enforced. Noble, sure. Worth a shot, I guess, but I think we're going to have some schools complaining about those fines because I don't think that's going to stop it much. Personally, I don't know if that's going to stop much. That's one change made, at least in the SEC this year, from a policy standpoint, but there's been a lot of changes in college athletics, and it stems from NIL and transfer portal, right? Like the way we watch college sports now is significantly different than it was 10 years ago. About 10 years ago, you can rely on knowing who's coming back on a year-to-year basis, and in football standpoint, usually the only question is anybody leaving for the draft, right? Is a junior not coming back for his senior year because he'll declare for the NFL draft. Well, now it's different. Now we see every December when a team season ends, an exodus of players, sometimes some larger than others, and it's changed the way that we keep up with the sport. It changes the way that you have to consume the sport, right? It changes the way you follow along with the sport in the offseason because, like professional sports, there is a window to essentially sign players. It's unlitigated free agency, right? And early on in this process, I know when I started my sports talk radio career, it was around that time. It was 2019. And a lot of the discussion about some of the lawlessness of player movement was mostly centered on how we felt it was going to go. How we felt multiple transfers how it would bode well or not well for a player. Some say it's bad for the game because it's bad for player development. Some about the thing I alluded to earlier about being a fan and keeping up with it, right? It can be a lot more difficult. But Chris Hummer from CBS Sports, fantastic name, but a fantastic research piece that he did as well, put up a story on CBSSports.com where he broke down the numbers about the players that were considered elite prospects, which for that website is the top 24/7. So it's what they consider to be the highest tier of high school football player going into college. And he took a lot of data from that to really determine how much transferring maybe benefits a player or doesn't benefit a player, especially as it pertains to getting into the NFL draft. A lot of these guys, like I love going back on to whether it's On3 or 24/7, going into their databases, going back about 10 years or so and seeing what the top 50 players were in the 2013 class, right? And just seeing some names, we're like, well, that didn't pan out. Or you see somebody maybe outside the top 100, we're like, wow, in hindsight, that's a steal. It's a fun exercise. And if you ever just get really bored, I highly recommend doing that because you'd be amazed at some of the names that you see at the top of these recruiting rankings. And then some guys that get drafted from that same high school class that you don't see their names at all because they were late bloomers or they just developed in college. It's fun to go back and look at those. But Chris did the hard work here and really broke it down. And there's a lot of things that he learned that I think is pretty applicable, right? Now we have data to determine whether or not a player transferring twice is doomed for failure, or that much change from coach to coach and system to system ultimately hurts them. I think we're starting to finally get a more nuanced vision as to what impact the transfer portal has had and not having to sit out a year has done to the players, right? This study specifically talks about the development of those players. Now, I think one thing that we all could have guessed going into this, we could have hypothesized, was that quarterbacks probably transfer the most. That makes sense just from a logical perspective. You can only play one quarterback at a time unless, you are Lance Leipold at Kansas and you find ways to have two quarterbacks in the backfield and do a lot of weird stuff with it. But for the most part, 99% of the time, you can only play one quarterback. So I think we could have all guessed that position is most likely to transfer. But one thing that's fascinating is not just how much they transfer, but how much some of the top quarterbacks transfer. So Chris went back and looked at 24/7's top recruits at the quarterback position in 2023, looked at the top 8. And that was just the 2023 recruiting class. So that's 2 springs ago. And already 7 of those top 8 quarterbacks have transferred once. Already. They've already transferred once. So it's a really high rate. He went on to note that 69% of quarterbacks in that elite category since 2018 have transferred at least once. It is a very, very high rate. But what he's also discovered is that players in general, not just quarterbacks, find themselves to be more likely to get drafted if they stay at their original school. So I'll throw some numbers that I've found to be pretty eye-popping. Players considered elite by 24/7 Sports out of high school who have had at least 4 seasons in college. That's the pool we're talking here. Guys who played 4 years in college who are considered elite coming out of high school by 24/7 Sports. It's a large pool. But 307 of those players have been drafted. I'll give you a second to think about how many you think of those 307 players transferred at least once in their career. Thinking of a number. That number is actually as low as 61. Only 61 of those players that were considered elite high school players by 24/7 Sports and played at least 4 years in college, only 61 of those 307 that were drafted transferred at least once. That tells you a lot about the development of guys who stay in one place. And I understand how advantageous it can be to, if you're there for a year and let's say a year or two and a coach gets fired and you're a tight end and the new coach that comes in doesn't run a tight end friendly system. You're doing a lot of blocking, but you want to block and you want to go out, run some routes and score touchdowns. Totally normal. A totally reasonable desire. You can transferring once, it can be a benefit. But ultimately, if you do it enough, you might have some stunting done with your development. That's a real possibility. That's something that I've theorized would happen for a while, but haven't been able to really look at the numbers that might reflect that point of view. Now, out of the 199 multi-time transfers from 2018 to 2022, again, from 2018 to 2022, these are guys that were considered elite high school football players. 199 were multi-time transfers. Only 2 of those players in that span have been drafted. Only 2. Ironically enough, both of them named Tyler. And also, ironically enough, one of them technically transferred twice, but only really played for 2 teams. That's Tyler Barron. Tyler Barron started his career as an edge rusher over at Tennessee and then transferred, hit the portal, transferred to Louisville, and then before stepping on the field at Louisville, transferred to Miami. So they're counting that. I don't even know if I would count that. I think I would just count if you played at 3 different schools. So you could even eliminate, really, Tyler Barron from that discussion. But the other is Tyler Shuck. Now, the quarterback the New Orleans Saints just drafted in the 2nd round, who played for Oregon, Texas Tech, and Louisville, and took a while to really catch his stride. And he might be considered an anomaly. Really, you think about the quarterbacks that you see in college football that are on schools number 2 or 3. Usually you can point at them being a very similar quarterback to what they were when they were in high school. Jaden Rashad is the perfect example. That's a guy that, outside of the infamous story where Florida offered him gobs of money that the school didn't have, well, at least the NIL collective offered him money the school didn't have. He gets to campus, school don't have it, and he leaves. Well, that's already one departure, one change of plans. Then he goes to Arizona State for a year, gets to play. It's a tough season. They were still recovering from the damage done by Herm Edwards and that staff. They were on a bowl ban. It was almost a throwaway season for Kenny Dillingham in his first year as the head coach of the Sun Devils. Well, then he leaves for Georgia, and he's not even the backup quarterback, right? Gunnar Stockton was the clear number 2 quarterback in that room. And then, of course, Carson Beck started the year. So then when Carson Beck gets hurt in the SEC championship game, it's Gunnar Stockton who's playing the entire second half, not Jaden Rashada. And then when you get to the quarterfinal game in the playoff, it was Gunnar Stockton who played the entire game against Notre Dame. No Jaden Rashada to be found, even when Georgia's offense was struggling to move the ball against a really stingy Notre Dame defense. Well, now Jaden Rashada hits the transfer portal again, and now he's at Sacramento State. So this is his third school in 3 years. And I don't know if anybody's actually seen him play enough to determine whether or not he is any better than he was when he was considered a blue-chip high school football prospect. So this makes sense. I think the data is starting to support a lot of what our priors were coming into this entire, I don't even want to say experiment. It's the reality of college sports now. But with the successes you have, there are some successes. But the successes don't come from the elite players. Now, the numbers I just gave you were the study of elite high school players, where it clearly shows that if you're an elite high school prospect, it will benefit you to stay at the school you sign with and wait until you can play, or at least developing through that system and through that program, that your patience can be rewarded. But the successes of guys that transfer multiple times don't transfer top down. They have a linear progression. And Cam Ward's the best example of this. In the story, he cites Cam Ward and Josh Simmons. Josh Simmons, a offensive lineman, started at San Diego State, made the transfer up to Ohio State, saw his draft stock explode, basically. I mean, had a really good year. Injuries, I know, derailed the last season, but he saw himself getting drafted in the first round. Cam Ward's one of those guys that he had 0 stars, right? He did not register on whether it's On3 or 24/7 Sports' high school composite rankings. They didn't have rankings for him because he was that low. Starts out at Incarnate Word, shreds FBS record books, goes to Washington State, gets into, or FCS record books, gets into Washington State, then tears up the FBS record books in a year, 2 years at Washington State, then goes to Miami and has the year he had last year where he's a Heisman finalist. He's the number 1 overall pick in the draft. That progress has been linear. You see a lot more of those successes of guys who maybe start at a lower level, play early, and then start to develop. The development starts from them playing, and then you can see them maybe transfer once or twice up different schools each time, and then they ultimately reach a point where they're at their most full, or the development is almost complete, and then they're able to get drafted because of the work they've been able to put out there. So I found that interesting. And that, along with, quarterbacks having a 69% transfer rate, but the 2 lowest are the big nasties, defensive tackles and offensive tackles. Now, defensive tackles, the elite high school prospects only transfer at least once 36% of the time. And for offensive tackles, that number's a little lower to 32.5%. So what you see a lot, too, is an evaluation of these offensive and defensive linemen in high school where you're banking on them staying and developing. They're maybe not as ready right away, but they understand that. And when they do develop within the walls of your facility, you're more likely to pay top dollar to be able to keep them. And that seems to be the case right now with blue chip recruits at the defensive tackle and offensive tackle position. So a fascinating look where we can actually put numbers and data to the thoughts and theories we've had as to the impact of transferring 1 or 2 times at this level. And we're only going to get more info as the years go on and the more college sports changes, but I think that's a pretty fascinating way to look at the new world of college athletics and as it pertains to development. We'll take a quick break right now. We come back. Greg Sankey had some more comments at SEC spring meetings yesterday. What does this mean when it comes to a 5-11 college football playoff format? Greg talked about that, and we'll hear from him when the postgame show returns. It's the hot topic of the week. SEC spring meetings, and there's so much discussion about what the future of the college football playoff is going to look like. What's the future of SEC scheduling? And they really go hand in hand with the SEC and Greg Sankey, along with the Big Ten and Commissioner Tony Petitti. Those are the power brokers of the sport. Like Brett Yormark can say something interesting at the Big 12 meetings. Jim Phillips can end up saying something interesting at the ACC, but those two aren't the power brokers of the sport. They've kind of all given that power to the two big moneymakers between the SEC and Big Ten, and they did so for better or for worse of college athletics. But the fact of the matter is, two conferences and two men hold an ungodly amount of power in the world of college football. They have seized it, and I don't foresee them giving it up. So when Greg Sankey speaks this week, it becomes news, especially when we're floating around what the future of the college football playoff is like. And really, as long as we've been talking about this postseason tournament, ever since it was brought to life in 2014, or in the 2014 season, there's always talk about tweaking it, but never so to this point where we are throwing around different models, further expansion. There's a lot on the line with the decisions that are going to be made going into the future for the entire sport. And there have been three models that have been tossed around. That was our Twitter poll of the day at 107.5 The Game. We kind of asked you, the listener, what you would prefer in a potential 16-team playoff format. Notice we didn't say keep it at 12 because they're not going to keep it at 12. I would prefer they keep it at 12. I thought 12 was an adequate amount of teams last year. I had no gripe with it. If you wanted to do the seeding differently, I'm not going to get bent out of shape for that because I think that would have resulted in some better matchups, more intriguing matchups, and would have kept Oregon from having to play Ohio State in the quarterfinal. That was a quirk of the bracket, and I was able to live with that. But if you want to change it, cool. But we're going to get to 16. That part is inevitable. So when we do, what is your specific preference for how they field it? Is it a 4-4-2-2-1 automatic qualifier with conferences plus 3 at-large bids, or 5 automatic qualifiers for your 4 P4 conference champions plus the group of 6, now known as their champion, plus 11 at-large bids, or do what Lane Kiffin suggested and just rank the 16 best teams and roll it out from there. 1 play 16, 2 play 15, so on and so forth. And it's a pretty overwhelming majority of you, 69%, a nice percentage of you, say just put the 16 best teams in there. 24% are cool with 5 automatic qualifiers across the board, 1 for each league, plus 11 at-large bids, and only 7% are with the option that I personally hate the most, and that's 4 automatic qualifiers in the SEC, 4 from the Big Ten, 2 for the ACC and Big 12 each, and then 1 for the group of 6. Thankfully, I can agree with a lot of you that we don't love that part of it. I think that is just so antithetical to what sports are, to just predetermine tournament spots and then give at-larges, which the SEC and Big Ten will gobble up and look like they're Pac-Man by the time doing it. They'll do it so fast, they'll gobble up those remaining spots. They ain't going to the Big 12 or ACC, even if those schools have gripes. I think that's just kind of the nature of the beast. But Greg Sankey did speak. We heard this in the last hour, but I want to play it again, talking about a 5+11 model and the importance of the SEC championship and all of that. Because if we go to the automatic qualifier thing with SEC getting 4 and Big Ten getting 4, it's really pointless to play an SEC championship game. It almost becomes obsolete because on that same day you'd be playing 2 games where 4 teams in those 2 games are playing for their lives in the college football playoff, assuming the losers aren't eligible to be at-large teams. So here's Greg's thought process talking about that 5+11 format, plus the importance of trying to preserve that special Saturday game in Atlanta every December.
The coaches actually today talked with me about that importance. And they talked about, I'll call it a 5-11 model a lot with me, and our own ability to earn those berths. So we like yesterday, I don't think there was a lot of belief that We were interested in looking at models today. I think represented exactly what I share. And we have had conversations today about the meaning of a conference championship still being retained. So I thought those were good things. And yesterday when I was asked, I said, look, doing away with that's not like anywhere near the top of my agenda with the issues we have.
And then he was also asked as well about a 9-game SEC schedule in play-in games and the idea of play-in games. And here was his response to that.
Well, the 9-game schedules, like real play-in formats or concepts, they're just out there. So is there somebody who said we have to have one to have the other? Yep. Do I think that way? I don't. You can make independent decisions. Back to my observation, you can make decisions about what you can control, and then you can have influence over other decisions you don't control, you participate in. But the timing is not what I would have designed from an optimal standpoint.
The big takeaway there is Greg's kind of insinuation that a 9-game SEC slate and a 5-11 type 16-team format, they're not mutually exclusive. I know Greg wants 9 games, everybody to play 9 SEC games. I think coaches, or at least the administrators, are a little hesitant on it because they're trying to set up those programs the best way possible to be able to get into the college football playoff, and I get that to a degree, but here's where the administrators of the schools in the SEC maybe lacked some foresight when it came to decisions earlier in the last decade and a half that might bite them in the rear now. So one of the reasons why I think you should play 9 games is because your conference is just so big. You're only playing about half your league on a year-in, year-out basis. Now, one extra game doesn't cover the other half, but it gives you a larger picture to truly crown who your champion is. Again, I alluded to what happened last year when Michael was in the studio with me, talking about Texas A&M. If they were off to a better start and they could move the ball against Texas, they could have hung around, and if they win that game, that's a 3-loss team getting into the college football playoff. Or not the SEC championship game. And then if they lose that game, then they're at 4 losses, and they were going to be in the college football playoff because they were in the SEC championship game. Like, the committee already pretty much said they're not going to punish losers of conference title games, and they were true to their word when they kept SMU in, despite SMU losing to Clemson and Charlotte. So Texas A&M would have gotten in, but A&M drew a more favorable draw when it comes to SEC opponents, and still dropped a couple of them, and ultimately ended up dropping 3 of them after Texas took it to them in their home stadium. But for those that push back and say that the 9 SEC games would just be too hard, I would just say that's too bad. That's too bad, because the schools are the ones who wanted to bring in Texas and Oklahoma. Texas and Oklahoma didn't kick down the door and make themselves right at home. They were given an invitation on some pretty nice paper and some stationery. They were invited in. They came in. The SEC held the door open for them, brought out the red carpet, and gave them all the refreshments they wanted to. It was a warm welcoming. They wanted them in here. So you voted to bring in Texas and Oklahoma. You voted to swell the conference to where it's so big it can't zip up its own britches, which is one of the worst feelings in the world, by the way. And usually the most obnoxious reminder that you might need to drop some pounds. I don't like doing that. But the SEC is having that moment right now, where you are having to seriously discuss a 9th SEC game, but you don't want to do it because you don't want to sacrifice a potential loss or risk losing a game that you feel like can keep you out of the playoff. And there's no better evidence of that than Alabama's AD, Greg Burns, still opining about not getting into the college football playoff despite the losses they had were to teams they should have beat. In one of those games, you lost by 3 touchdowns. But the conference has just swelled. You voted to make it harder. You wanted it to be harder by including Texas and Oklahoma. So don't complain about adding an extra game and talking about how it's going to be hard to make the college football playoff when the change that triggered this is one that you welcomed with open arms. We'll take a quick break. When we come back, Kirby Smart, somebody I like to poke fun of because of some complaints despite things that he benefits from, actually made a point that I agree with. And Lane Kiffin also agreeing with it. It must be a cold day in hell. It's the Postgame Show. From the Wetzel's Automotive Traffic Studios, I'm Elijah Campbell with some fantastic news, and that's that there are 0 reports of accidents that are causing traffic backups in the Midlands right now. Of course, we do have some road construction on 20 eastbound. It's got the left lane closed near exit 98 near Kershaw County. We also have some long-term road construction that might cause you issues on I-20 between exit 64 and 65, and on 26 between exit 108A and exit 125. But other than that, no accidents causing any traffic backups. And what we're talking about, the future, the college football playoff, the future of SEC scheduling. We've already heard what Greg Sankey had to say at the SEC spring meetings, but Greg's not the only one who spoke. You have to share the microphone, which is very kind of Greg. I can appreciate that sentiment, and sharing it with the coaches who were asked some questions as well about their thoughts, whether it be the college football playoff, scheduling having 9 games in your SEC slate on a year-in, year-out basis, and even things like the transfer portal. And now I don't normally agree with Kirby Smart. I like Kirby Smart. I don't want to make it think that that's, my nemesis or the bane of my existence or anything like that. I respect Kirby Smart. I think he's the best coach in college football right now, and what he's built at Georgia, I think will ultimately end up mirroring what Nick Saban did at Alabama, where he's going to win a lot of national titles. He's going to be in a lot of national title games. I think now the SEC really runs through Athens, Georgia. You even saw it this past year that even with a backup quarterback in the second half, they beat an incredible Texas team to win the SEC title. The SEC has to go through Kirby Smart in Georgia. But sometimes it is a lot of fun to poke fun at him when he mentions things like, oh, you thought we'd be 7-5 this year. And saying that moments after beating TCU 65-7 for a national championship, because A, nobody really said that. And I'm still looking for the receipt of somebody who said that Georgia team was going to go 7-5. Spoiler alert, you're probably never going to find it because it doesn't exist. So we like to poke fun at Kirby Smart that way. And sometimes it's fun to punch up when making fun of people because Georgia's just that good. But he did say something that I could really appreciate when it comes to things like the transfer portal. Yes, the transfer portal and NIL has made the college football head coaching job a whole lot harder than it was before 2018. It's already a hard job. It was even harder now that you have to be GM and have all of these elements of the game that you just weren't prepared for, right? That not many coaches, if any, in 2018 were prepared to start handling. But it makes things harder. You see maybe the career span of coaches maybe starting to shorten a little bit. But Kirby Smart said something about the transfer portal yesterday where I was like, you know what? I think you make a really good point. Here's what he had to say.
Well, I don't care if it's 1 or 2, really. I mean, I'd prefer 1, but I'm okay with 2. What I don't want is 1 in June. I mean, in April, because I think that's a recipe for disaster, and that's what we're starting to get pushed by some outside conferences that feel strongly that it should be in April. And I'm like, well, what are we doing January, February, March, in April when I try to build my team? My team's not built. Like we don't know.
If I gave you the date to do it, you pick what day?
Coach, don't you have players kind of could hold you hostage at that point too?
Oh.
And they've already gotten a lot of
it may have already happened.
Oh, by the way, we got to pay them the whole time.
Yeah.
Well, it's the first I heard today that there was an idea of, well, instead of paying them those months, we wouldn't pay them. We would only pay them in the season, which is an NFL model, right?
Yeah, right.
You guys got paid, weekly by your games.
Right.
And I'm like, well, now we're talking about January, February, March, not paying them. They would just leave. They would just quit coming to meetings. If they were leaving, they would leave. Like, we need to get our team as quickly as possible. There's good and bad for both. Now, I don't want to act like it's lopsided because people feel like January you can't get them in school because everybody has a different academic calendar.
Right.
We've always had that problem. A lot of complaint, well, we played in the national championship game and we missed this opportunity to get the guys in the portal. Hey, I did too. 2 years.
Right.
Nobody said, well, that's not fair. You know what I mean? Like, that's part of crying from the yacht. You can't cry from the yacht.
That's the best part. You can't cry from the yacht. And that's the one thing that I always kind of get bothered by coaches that are playing in the national championship game and they kind of complain about being at a disadvantage. Like, buddy, you're in the national championship game. Like, you are accomplishing goals. Or you win a national championship, you're accomplishing goals. Being in the national championship game alone is going to help you with recruiting later on, even if you have to maneuver the difficult calendar that we're dealt with right now. But I think obviously the meat of that clip right there was Kirby talking about the transfer portal windows. And like, I understand trying to get some uniformity, and I understand really trying to limit it down to just one transfer portal window. I get that. We try to make it as easy as possible. It's not as simple as 1 in April because, again, Kirby makes a really good point. You're trying to build your team through the spring and then have your spring practices and then see what you can do to build in the summer, right? Like, those months from January to April are still very valuable for college football programs to build the foundation of what that next year's team is going to be. I clearly think it's not ideal the way it is right now, having a transfer portal window open during bowl season in the college football playoff, as we've seen multiple instances already, especially with quarterbacks. You heard the stat I mentioned in the first hour, if you were tuned in, to where out of all the positions on a football field, the blue chip high school recruits, 69% of them at quarterback transfer at least once. It's a large chunk, just because you can only play one at a time. You only have one starting quarterback. And Malik Murphy at Texas 2 years ago left the team before the college football playoff because he wanted to start somewhere. Totally fine. Bo Pribula, the backup quarterback at Penn State this year, who actually played a lot, right? I mean, he was put in packages. They would use him on a few drives. He left the team before the college football playoff so he could find a starting spot somewhere. Now he's a starting quarterback, presumably, at Missouri. It's not ideal. And that's really, to me, more so, not more so, but almost as much as the NIL thing and figuring out how to distribute revenue share amongst your student athletes. The biggest thing you have is the transfer portal window. Like, that's tough. You have teams that are playing they don't have to be playoff teams, right? You could be preparing for a bowl game and you're still trying to recruit for next season. You're still trying to keep up with who all's in the portal and getting kids on campus for visits and getting that recruitment process running. So that way you can ensure that your next season is going to be fully staffed from a roster standpoint. I completely agree with that. I don't always find myself in agreement with Kirby Smart, but I think he hit the nail on the head there with his thoughts on the transfer portal. When it comes to Lane Kiffin, too, Michael and I talked in the first hour. If you missed it, definitely encourage you to go back and watch the first hour on the YouTube stream. But we talked about the model that we both liked the best, and that was maybe just seeding them 1 through 16 for the college football playoff. And that's kind of what Lane Kiffin suggested down in Destin.
I think I would just sum it up by, after all the data and analytics, about if there were these different systems over the years, who would be left out and who would be in, whether that was 12-team, 16 system. And it just appeared to me that there's still flaws in every system. The best system should be 16 and should be the 16 best. And I don't know exactly how that's figured out. I think that they've got to use some of the indexes and have people, I'm not saying that because I'm in here, probably media people that watch the most, that are on it and don't have any other motives in it, and figure out the best 16 teams. Because we obviously can't play enough games over that, to be 32 or 64 or something to figure out the best. But I think as you watch this year in sports, and now baseball, softball, after men's basketball, so many dominate, whether it's the final 8 or 12 or 16 with the SEC teams, and their systems of figuring that out. And I think a lot of that has to do with the non-conference amount of opponents they play. Obviously we don't have as many games, so we can't do that, because you see, for instance, baseball, these teams that have made it this far that have SEC and conference records just a little bit over 500. So I think that would be the best way to do it. Get rid of automatics and figure out a system to get the best 16 teams in.
I like that. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. I think the reason I kind of gravitate maybe towards a playoff system like that is because it's simplicity. It is complicated to do what we did this past year, and at the beginning of every single college football playoff ranking show, have to re-explain how the bracket looks. So when you see the number 1 through 16, that not all of those 16 being in the top 16 means that you're going to be in the playoff, because there could be a conference champion from another conference that gets in and you get an automatic qualifier, but it's only the 4 highest ranked conference championship winners that get a bye. So the bracket looks a little different, and it could be a little difficult to explain over and over and over again. I appreciate the simplicity of Lane's idea. However, I love conference championship games, and I think that they should be at least efforted, industry term, to keep those things as important as possible, because they're great money makers, and it's things that we all love about the sport. So auto qualifications for championship game winners, I can still get behind, but I appreciate the simplicity of Lane's thought. We'll round out the second hour with some great news, some fantastic news, and it might be the best news that college football fans will hear all day. I'll tell you what that is on the other side. I understand it can be kind of exhausting rehashing the college football playoff format, SEC scheduling. A lot of the college football news, college sports news we get usually doesn't discuss the game itself, right? A lot of it's the battles in courtrooms. A lot of the discussion with the NCAA is stuff that doesn't involve a basketball court or a football field or a softball or baseball diamond. But there's been some good news today resulting in eligibility for who I think is one of the, if not the most influential coach in the history of college football. Now, for years, for the College Football Hall of Fame, there was a winning percentage requirement for coaches to be eligible, right? So if your winning percentage wasn't 60%, no matter what you did in your career, you were never going to be eligible for the College Football Hall of Fame. And for one, Mike Leach, legendary head coach, last at Mississippi State before his unexpected passing, and before that at Washington State, and before that at Texas Tech, and was an assistant with Hal Mumme at Kentucky in the late 90s, somebody who is credited with inventing the air raid offense and coming up with an offense that is pass heavy, that modernized the sport and has been copied all over the place. At one point in the Big 12, it seemed like every team was running an air raid offense, and the offensive numbers in that league boomed for about a decade. And a lot of great coaches and offensive minds have taken from the success of Mike Leach and have been able to further what their offenses look like. He is credited with being one of the most influential coaches in college football history, aside from his hilarity, from his sense of humor, from being really quirky. He was one of the best characters in the history of the sport, which kind of made people more drawn to him. Well, now, Brett McMurphy reports today that the original requirement of a 60% win percentage has now been lowered to 59.5%. This makes Mike Leach eligible, starting next season, to be voted on to be in the College Football Hall of Fame. And I love that. Some people might look at it as bending rules to accept quote-unquote mediocrity or whatever, but the winning percentage for someone like Mike Leach doesn't tell the story of Mike Leach, right? He was winning at programs that aren't historical winners. Mississippi State, for instance, right? They won 9 games his last year coaching. Washington State, they've had some great players, but the offenses at Washington State never looked that way until Mike Leach got there. And what he's done with quarterbacks is revolutionary. What he's done with coaching offense is revolutionary. And is just that torch has been passed and has kept moving further and further. He is one of the greatest influencers in the history of college football. And he absolutely deserves to be in the College Football Hall of Fame. I don't care what the winning percentage is. When your influence is that large in this sport, you deserve to be celebrated. And it's not just Mike Leach, too, that's now eligible. Les Miles, now that standard has been brought down a little bit, is eligible, and so is Jackie Sherrill. We all know about Les Miles, 2007 national champion as the coach at LSU, and Jackie Sherrill, one of the best defensive minds in the history of the sport. Another guy who also coached at Mississippi State. So it could be hard to win at some of those places these guys coach at, but I don't think that should keep some of them out of the College Football Hall of Fame, especially somebody with the influence of Mike Leach. So it'd be very well deserved. Looking forward to seeing him inducted one day because he will get in there. 5 o'clock news coming up next, and later in the next hour, I'm taking on the internet. Let's see how that goes. From the Wetzel's Automotive Traffic Studios, I'm Elijah Campbell with thankfully no accidents again to get to you that are causing issues on the roadways. Now, I believe we do have a severe thunderstorm warning for a few counties in this area, so be safe on the roads. Make sure that we keep that accident number to 0. We still have some road construction that might cause you some issues, like on 20 between exit 64 and 65, 26 between exit 108A and exit 125, and on I-126 between Hugh G Street and I-26, but no traffic backups as a result of accidents so far, thankfully. It's 5 o'clock. You know what that means. Time to get you the latest in the sports news. It's the Postgame Show. I'm Elijah Campbell. No Jay Phillips today. He'll be a DNP. Did not play due to an illness. Now, hopefully we can get him back tomorrow, but if not, we'll afford him another day of rest, get himself ready to take on the week next week. But we'll go ahead and start off in the NBA last night. The Oklahoma City Thunder, the first team to punch their ticket to the NBA Finals this year. A fantastic performance from MVP Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. He finished last night with 34 points, the high scorer in the game. Also collected 7 rebounds, picked up 8 assists as well on 14 of 25 shooting. And for people who like to refer to him as a free throw merchant, only attempted 4 free throws, but he made all of them. Alex Caruso actually shot more free throws last night than Shai Gilgeous-Alexander did. But the story of this team is definitely the defensive performance and the job they did on Anthony Edwards the entire season. Now, Ant didn't crack 20. He only scored 19 points last night on 7 of 18 shooting and really did a fantastic job with him the entire series to make sure outside of really Game 3, not taking over in a way that would cost them the series. Now, this Thunder team, a fascinating bunch, considering that they're the youngest team in the NBA. With an average age of only 24 years old. They won 68 games in the regular season, swept the first-round series, went to 7, pushed by Nikola Jokic and the Denver Nuggets, but were able to dominate Game 7. And then outside of Game 3, they dominated the Minnesota Timberwolves 4-1. So they win last night, and they punch their ticket to the NBA Finals. Now, in our Jay versus the Internet segment, it was not a banner day for you guys voting on our Twitter polls every day. Now, for today, it's obviously me, not Jay, taking on the Internet. And it looks like we got about 15 more minutes, I guess, in those polls. So you can still vote and participate. But last night, you guys both took the Timberwolves to cover 8.5. That did not happen. So unfortunately for you guys, both of you missed out on that. In the NHL last night, the Stanley Cup final, now that is half set as well. The Florida Panthers ended the Carolina Hurricanes season. Now the Hurricanes going into Game 4 were on a pretty historic losing streak in the Eastern Conference Finals. Got swept the last 3 previous times that they were in this stage of the playoffs. Was looking to try to take the series back to Sunrise, Florida for a Game 6, and it looked like that was the case early. They scored 2 goals in the first period, but then in about a 30-second stretch, the Panthers scored 2 in the second, scored 1 late in the period as well. They end up winning 5-3, and it's what we call a gentleman's sweep. Hurricanes lose in 5, so the local, I guess put air quotes around that local because Raleigh's still a couple hours away. The local team loses. Their season ends in the Eastern Conference Finals, and the Panthers will take on the winner of the Stars and the Oilers for the Stanley Cup title. More than likely, because if the Oilers win tonight, which I don't expect them to, if the Oilers win tonight, that will send them to the Stanley Cup final, and then that means we have a rematch of last year's Stanley Cup final. Moving on in the 5 o'clock news as well, the Braves played today. Now, last night, they had their game rained out against the Philadelphia Phillies. They have a doubleheader today, so they got things started early on. And for the Braves now, they fall to 4 games under 500, and the road record not looking good with the loss today, a 5-4 loss to the Philadelphia Phillies. The Braves now fall to 9-20 in games away from Atlanta. Not ideal, and that puts them now 11 games behind the Philadelphia Phillies, so that win gets them to 36-19, and just 2 nights ago, the Phillies won 2-0, so they've already clinched the series. Not the greatest day for A.J. Smith-Shawver on the mound. He only went 2 2/3 innings, 1 strikeout, 1 walk, gave up 2 earned runs and 3 hits, only threw 38 pitches. Domingo Hernandez was credited with the loss for the Phillies. On the mound, got a win from Ruiz, Romano with a save, and they took a 2-0 lead in about the 3rd inning, pushed it to 3 in the 5th, and tacked on a couple more in the 7th and 8th innings to be able to seal the deal there. Ultimately, the game-winning run, Marchand got hit by a pitch with the bases loaded, gave the Phillies a 5-4 lead, and that was all she wrote in that one. So the Braves fall to the Phillies. They will play again at about 6:45, so here in about an hour and 40 minutes, they'll be playing. Chris Sale is going to be taking the mound. He's had a pretty solid season so far, 2-3 with a 3.36 ERA, not what he was last year when he won the NL Cy Young. And it's not going to get any easier for the Braves because they're facing off against Zach Wheeler, who's having a fantastic season this year. He is 6-1 with a 2.42 ERA. So the Braves trying to get closer to 500 and try to close that gap on the Philadelphia Phillies as much as possible. And look, when the Braves were getting back Spencer Strider and Ronald Acuna, I figured, they were playing pretty good ball when they were coming back. That probably not much to worry about. I know it's still May. It is May 29th right now, so I'm not here to press any type of panic button. But if you're a Braves fan, I think the pessimism that you might have experienced earlier in the season is not only more warranted, but now the fear of not making the playoffs is going to be rather real. I know there is precedent for this team when they get to early June being under 500 and, winning the World Series. That happened in the not-too-distant past. But a lot's going to have to change for this team right now. We'll see if they're able to make those adjustments throughout the season. Again, we're about to go into June with them being under 500 and the Philadelphia Phillies being one of the best teams in baseball. They're at 36-19. Again, that's an 11-game difference between those two right now. Women's College World Series has started today. Right now, Tennessee leads mighty Oklahoma 3-1 in the bottom of the 6th. Actually, no, we're out of the 6th inning now. We're now in the top of the 7th, so Oklahoma 3 outs away from being sent to the losers bracket in the first game of the Women's College World Series. Right now, Tennessee at the bat to start, so they can maybe even tack on some insurance runs here as well, but not looking good for the 4-time defending champion Oklahoma Sooners. The first game today, an all-SEC affair as well. That entire side of the bracket is essentially all SEC, and then on the other side, you have Ole Miss against Texas Tech and then Oregon and UCLA, but the SEC side of the bracket, Texas beat Florida today 3-0 in an impressive fashion. Texas only surrendered 2 hits to the Gators all game as well. A low-scoring game, but Jolie Mitchell hits 2 home runs to make the difference. Really, only 1 home run would have done, but 2 is pretty good insurance. So Texas will await the winner of Tennessee and Oklahoma here in the winner's bracket, and Florida will await the loser of this game. And it looks like, barring anything crazy in the bottom of the 7th, which wouldn't be surprised if it happened because Oklahoma's Oklahoma, but Oklahoma could be facing or staring down the barrel of elimination against a really good Florida team, a Florida team that is the number 3 overall seed right now. So we'll keep you updated as that one continues. 5 o'clock news, we'll go ahead and go back to one of the things we talked about earlier, one of the biggest pieces of news in college football that has nothing to do with the college football playoff, NIL, or transfer portal is the National Football Foundation announced, this is from Dave Wilson at ESPN, announced an adjustment to eligibility criteria today that's going to open the door to make Mike Leach a college football Hall of Famer. Now, for those who don't know, Mike Leach's winning percentage was 59.6, which is just a hair shy of 60%. And for the College Football Hall of Fame for head coaches, if you were going to get into the Hall of Fame, you have to have a win percentage of at least 60. So he fell just a bit short, but today it was announced that the new rule will set eligibility at 59.5%. So that would mean Mike Leach is eligible. That would mean Les Miles, the former national championship winning head coach at LSU, will be eligible because his winning percentage is at 59.7. And, of course, he had 37 wins with LSU vacated because of NCAA infractions, but this would make Les Miles eligible. And it would also make longtime Pittsburgh, Texas A&M, and Mississippi State head coach Jackie Sherrill eligible for the Hall of Fame. He is sitting right at 59.5% for his winning percentage. And I was saying in the last hour, too, I think this is fantastic news for the sport because all three of those guys, well, obviously one of them being a national championship head coach with Les Miles at LSU back in 2007, where they were the first team in the BCS era and the only team in the BCS era, really, to win a national championship with multiple losses. But that opens the door for him to be able to make it in. And then somebody like Jackie Sherrill, who's considered widely as one of the greatest defensive minds in the history of the sport, that opens the door for him to be in. I expect Jackie Sherrill to be in too. I expect Les Miles to be in, even though his tenure at Kansas was a disaster. He did a lot of winning at Oklahoma State. And obviously when you win a national championship, that puts you in a special class on its own too. And many would believe that just winning a national championship is hard enough and such a significant achievement that it would put you in the conversation anyway. But for Mike Leach, firmly believe he'll be in, not just because of the winning he did on the field, especially with teams that historically haven't been great. He did a lot of great stuff at Texas Tech, put them to heights they have never before seen. Washington State, they shredded all types of offensive records and sent quarterbacks to the NFL. And then at Mississippi State in his last year before tragically passing away, took them to 9 wins. And really one of my favorite Mike Leach memories is his first game at Mississippi State back in 2020 during the COVID year. LSU's coming off of their national championship with arguably the greatest team in the history of the sport. Now LSU wasn't the same the next year. They went 5-5, but that first game of the season, they played Mississippi State. And in Baton Rouge, Mike Leach's Mississippi State Bulldogs threw for over 500 yards in that game. That was his first game as a head coach in the SEC, and I think we all learned right then and there that the air raid offense can and will work in the Southeastern Conference. Of course, that's the offense that Mike Leach and Hal Mumme are credited for pretty much inventing, and an offense that is used by many college football teams now. And parts of it, schemes, different route trees, different elements of that offense have been used and expanded upon, and it's widely considered to be, or believed to be, one of the most influential offenses and offensive systems in the 21st century, maybe even the history of football. So somebody who's an innovator like Mike Leach was now will not have his winning percentage as a head coach be the thing that keeps him from the College Football Hall of Fame. And again, could be said for Les Miles and Jackie Sherrill. Those are our 5 o'clock headlines, as always, brought to you by our friends at Integrated Media. I know they are all types of busy helping people set up their home entertainment systems, but if you go ahead and get in now, they can hook you up with a fantastic home entertainment system right before we get into football season. I know my man Michael Geddes has been locked in on these NBA playoffs because he's voting in our Jay versus the Internet polls and has given me the inspiration for like the best nickname for any player in basketball right now, calling Tyrese Halliburton the Burt. So Michael's locked in on that. He can be locked in on you too, getting your home entertainment system set up in tip-top shape. We'll go ahead and take a quick break here, and when we come back, there's high expectation for the South Carolina football team. I know Jay, when he's in, always wants to put a baseline as 8 wins being the standard for South Carolina, and that can be, the goal every year. And last year, I don't think we went into the season expecting 8 or 9 wins. I know a lot of people nationally were not especially given some of the question marks around the roster, what Lenora Sellers was. Well, now we saw what Lenora Sellers did at the end of the season. We saw what Clayton White was able to do with that defense. You lose a lot of defensive players, but you have a lot of key contributors coming back. SP Plus has you projected to be a top 15 defense in the country, even with all of the departures. So with that being said, what is your expectation for this South Carolina football team going into 2025? Is it still 8 wins? Is it more? Are you expecting a college football playoff berth? We'll discuss that on the other side as the postgame show continues. Expectations for this South Carolina football team, high have they been in a long time? Look, and rightfully so. You have a quarterback who's considered to be a legitimate Heisman contender the way he had a finish to the season. The last 6 games were jaw-dropping at times, whether it's breaking out of a bunch of tackles and chucking the ball downfield against Vanderbilt or breaking a bunch of tackles. I think it was 18 against Clemson, which I believe to this day is still Pro Football Focus's record for most broken tackles for a quarterback in a game, to pull off a thrilling 17-14 win. The expectations are incredibly high, so that's the question I have for you guys today. What should the expectation be coming into this year? Now, Dylan Stewart coming back for the defense, obviously an incredible freshman season that made him a freshman All-American. And you can make the case he's the best edge rusher in the country right now. ESPN put him on a list of one of the best defensive players, one of the best non-quarterback players in all of college football. So you've got really the 2 most important positions covered, right? You got the quarterback position, which you feel really good about. You have an edge rusher, the guy who impacts the opposing team's quarterback, that at his best is virtually unblockable. You added some key pieces in the transfer portal. I still think one of the best pickups anybody had in college football this year was the Gamecocks getting Brandon Cisse from NC State. So that solidifies the back end of your defense, which you're already bringing back Judge Collier, who I thought improved by leaps and bounds last year, and Jalen Kilgore, who at his best I think has first-round NFL draft potential. And I'm not the only one that thinks that. There are plenty of mock drafts that have floated around. I know Tankathon at one point after the draft this year, they went ahead and moved on to the 2026 mock draft, and then their first iteration of it, they had Jalen Kilgore as a top 20 pick going to the Miami Dolphins. So there's a lot of expectation, and rightfully so. Last year, we didn't have as much. So with the schedule being that it is, because it's still a bear, it's still, even with 8 games in conference play, it's equally as hard, because now you got to go to Baton Rouge, you got to go to Oxford, Alabama and Oklahoma come here. You got to go to Missouri, a place where it's been tough for South Carolina to win at. And Missouri is a weird wild card this year because they replaced so much from an offense that was electric and so fun to watch. But they have a question at quarterback. What's Bo Pribula like in a full-time role as a starting quarterback, especially in the SEC? We don't know. There are real question marks there. But in non-conference too, Virginia Tech's not going to be a gimme. I expect South Carolina to win that game. But Virginia Tech, I thought, was better than they showed last year. I think they underachieved mightily, and they had a lot of one-score losses that didn't really help their case, right, in the luck category. But that's an intriguing game. And then, of course, you have Clemson at the end of the season, and I don't find it out of the realm of possibility that Clemson wins the national championship because of how much they bring back. They're very satisfied with what they had coming back at quarterback. Those receivers are a year older, a year better. They hit the transfer portal for the first time, and they're able to bring some people in. That's a dangerous team right there, too, only adding to what is an incredibly difficult slate. So combining the schedule with how you ended the season last year, what is a fair, realistic expectation for this South Carolina football team? And I think I'm going to set it at 8 wins. I think if you get to 8, you probably look back on a few games wishing you had back, obviously. But if you finish below 8, then I think you can say that you underachieved. There's so much talent on this Carolina team. And Jay and I talk about it a lot, that sometimes the hardest thing you can do is go from 9 wins to 10. Right? We saw what South Carolina did getting from 5 wins in 23 to 9 in 24, and that's difficult enough. I mean, anytime you hear Shane Beamer talk, he's never going to say it was easy turning that around. They were reaching a real impasse with the program. You needed to get yourself back into a bowl game. You needed to show people that you can contend in the SEC, and they did that. And it wasn't easy. But getting that extra win, going from 9 to 10, can be the hardest jump. But I think this team can legitimately compete for a spot in the college football playoff, even with 12 teams. You have the opportunities, and that's the best part about playing in the SEC, right, is that you have the opportunities. You have an opportunity to go beat LSU at Death Valley in Baton Rouge, which would be a fantastic thing to put on the resume because I think LSU is going to be a dangerous football team too. But they're replacing a lot on the offensive line. So if you want to look at matchups early on in the year, Does LSU have enough on the offensive line to replicate what they did offensively and keep Garrett Nussmeier upright? It might be hard to do against Dylan Stewart. Or if you have Desmond Umeozulu or Brian Thomas Jr. step up and really be that complementary edge rusher on the other side and that take advantage of the one-on-ones they're going to get, I can see you going to LSU and being very disruptive. I can see you going to Ole Miss, who this is going to be Austin Simmons' first year as a starter in the SEC. That can be very difficult. There can be a learning curve there. And in South Carolina, it's their first real big test, right? That's their first massive test where you got to see what he's got. So maybe in that game you can catch Ole Miss slipping a little bit, where they might not be as good as they are at the end of the season. But it provides a lot of interesting opportunity. Let's just say you catch Ole Miss early in that scenario and you beat them, and then they finish the year winning their last 6 some odd games, and they are 10-2 or 9-3. That looks great on the resume because you did that on the road. That's going to help a lot. Let's say Alabama is loaded, but you catch them on a bad day on offense. Again, still not completely sold with Ty Simpson as the number 1 quarterback for the Tide this year. I'm not really sold on an explosive runner for them to be able to make up for maybe lacking quarterback play, which historically Alabama's done. I mean, they won a championship with Jake Coker, and with Greg McElroy, I don't think completing more than 6 passes in a national title game. Historically, Alabama's always got a great running attack, but I wouldn't classify what they have in their backfield as great right now. So maybe you can beat Alabama. But let's just say they pick it up at the end of the year as well, and they finish 9-3. And you get yourself into a conversation where it's you at 9-3 and a bunch of other SEC teams at 9-3. You can find yourself in the opposite position as you did last year. Because I firmly believe last year, if you just have different good losses, right? If you still just lost to LSU, but instead of losing to Alabama, you lose to Clemson, and instead of losing to Ole Miss, you lost to Missouri or A&M, right? Which would still be good losses. I think you're probably in, because then you get that tiebreaker over Ole Miss and Alabama. I think we'll still see a traffic jam in between spots 12 and 16 in the college football playoff poll, where the head-to-head's going to matter a lot. And if that's the case and you pick up some of those key wins, then we're talking about the Gamecocks being in the college football playoff. And I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility. The SEC is the SEC. I totally get it. But if you finish at 9-3 next year, you're still in that same spot. And if you're able to beat a Clemson team at home who only has 1 loss or no losses maybe, if they get past LSU to start the season, I think that's a real possibility that they run through their league undefeated and they come in here to Columbia with no losses. With as much NFL talent as they have on that team, I think that's a real possibility. So planting the seed in everybody's head right now, what's your expectation for this football team going into next year? Steven on our YouTube stream says 10-2 in playoff berth. 10 wins is something this program has not seen frequently. It's been rare. But you got to love what you brought in the transfer portal, even with all the losses you have. I think the offensive line's in better shape than it's been in a long time, because I love what you bring in, and Josiah Thompson is coming off of an freshman All-America season where by stretches and bounds, he got better as the season went along. I expect him to be one of the best offensive linemen in the SEC. So then you have a stalwart tackle to protect your quarterback as well that you feel really good about. When you look at just the DNA of teams that make the college football playoff and what they're made of, it usually checks off all of those boxes. The quarterback, the person that rushes the opposing quarterback, the offensive line, and adequate weapons. We saw what Nick Harbor did at the end of the year. You bring in so much freshman talent from the high school ranks at wide receiver that you didn't feel the need to go out and get one in the transfer portal. I think that tells you more than what Mike Furry could say, whether it be on air with the Gamecock Central guys and Tyler, or in any press conference. They can say stuff all day, but the fact of the matter is they brought in all of those freshman wide receivers, and they didn't feel the need to pursue additional wide receiver help. I think that tells you enough about how good they feel about those guys' ability to impact the game immediately. So when you look up and down this team, and then defensively to outside of just Dillon, you love what you have in the secondary. And if your pass rush gets home, the secondary's job is going to be a lot easier. I think that's one of the reasons why Nick Emmanwori was able to get multiple pick sixes, is because the pass rush was just that good. I know it's still a while away till SEC media days, but I don't think making an expectation to make the playoff this year is unrealistic. Now, we had one texter on the text line say, Elijah, I'm a real Gamecock fan. Realistically, 8-4. I think that, look, I think this team has a wide range, right? I think 8-4, 9-3, and 10-2. Best case scenario, 10-2. Worst case scenario, 7-5. But I think at 8-4 with the roster you have in the league that you're in would still be a pretty successful season. We'll keep taking your texts and more. We'll take a drive around the SEC as the postgame show returns. From the Wetzel's Automotive Traffic Studios, I'm Elijah Campbell with 0 traffic-related accidents that are causing issues on the roadways. Thankfully, hopefully we keep that up. I know the weather is nasty right now. We have severe thunderstorm warnings issued all throughout the Midlands, and right here on Gervais, I'm seeing a steady stream of water on the roads right now. So please drive safe and keep those accidents at 0 if you can help it. Yes, it's drive around the SEC time, and folks, I did it again. Sometimes I just can't help myself. Because when in the 5 o'clock news segment, I was talking about the Tennessee-Oklahoma softball game, and I said, barring anything crazy, Tennessee will find themselves playing Texas in the winner's bracket because they were up 3-1 going into the bottom of the 7th. And sure enough, during the commercial break, Oklahoma gets a couple runners on, and with one out, hits a walk-off homer. And Oklahoma beats Tennessee 4-3. I'm going to give myself credit for speaking that into existence. So that's part of the drive around the SEC. And, of course, earlier this afternoon, Florida only managed 2 hits against Texas. Texas beats them 3-0. So in the Women's College World Series over in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma will take on Texas tomorrow in the winner's bracket. And then in a winner-go-home game, the Lady Vols will take on the Gators of Florida. And then, of course, tonight, UCLA and Oregon, that's the nightcap. Ole Miss will take on Texas Tech. So that's what's going on in Oklahoma City right now. We'll talk more about the college baseball setup when those games are on tomorrow. But we've gotten some texts and some calls about the expectation for the South Carolina team going into 2025. Despite, as always, a difficult schedule. My man Rocky called in during the break. Former basketballer himself, Rocky in Greenville. Rocky, thanks for calling the show. As always, my man, how's it going?
All right, man. Good to talk to you, and off the air, too. Get to know you a little bit as I listen to you on my run home all the time when I can. Okay, so Elijah back. Excuse me. So I read something, Lennar Sellers, I read something on social, on one of the kind of reputable sites or whatever. Basically, Lennar Sellers will keep South Carolina, at least in the beginning of each, in the conversation to win any game that's on their schedule. That's basically what I read, offensively. Yep. Now, obviously, there's got to be other things. And that just brought back memories back in under Spurrier's heyday. They won the SEC East, lost to Auburn, but that was the year they beat Alabama when they were number 1, and turned around and lost to Kentucky the next weekend, when they were favored by. And then you had the 3 11-2 seasons when they beat Georgia. And the thing that drove us crazy here was, okay, you go and beat Georgia, you can beat anybody on your schedule, but you're going to lose to somebody you got no business losing to. Mm-hmm. And that's what happened. You beat Georgia, okay, man, you're in driver's seat. But Georgia doesn't lose again, and you lose to Vanderbilt. What?
Right.
Or I'm using that as an example. You lose a game that you really should have won and probably favored to win. And so that was kind of the bugaboo there during those 11-2 seasons. So, it's just when you beat the guys you got to beat. You mentioned Ole Miss on the road. Yes. I hope they circled that because they laid an egg when they came here last year. So, it's just that kind of thing. You're capable of winning. It's just a matter of what you bring to the table that Saturday. And so we'll just wait and see. But that 10-2, who are you going to lose to and who are you going to beat?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And that question specifically, Rocky, could be what keeps you in and out of the college football playoff. And
yes.
And I know you mentioned 10-2, but let's just say 9-3, right? Like the reason Alabama at 9-3 didn't get into the college football playoff wasn't because they lost 3 games. It's because they did the exact same thing that you mentioned. The exact same thing. Like they beat Georgia at home. They had some good wins, and they had some other good wins, like the Tennessee.
I think they beat Texas too. Did they not beat Texas?
They did not beat Texas. No, they didn't play Texas this year. Yeah.
They didn't. Okay, my bad.
But I mean, like they had. I mean, you look at the wins. They're solid, and the Georgia win is a massive one, right? But if the Tennessee loss isn't what kept them out, that's an excusable loss, right? That was a 10-2 team that you were on the road in a hostile environment. You lose that game, completely explainable. No one's going to give them flack for that. But you lost to a 7-6 Vanderbilt team. It was the first time Vanderbilt had beaten Alabama, I want to say, since before the Vietnam War. And then and that was a close game, right? So maybe we can even concede that would be a forgivable loss. But then you play a 6-7 Oklahoma team on the road. Again, this is not the Oklahoma that we remember, right? This isn't what Lincoln Riley was doing, what Bob Stoops was doing, what Barry Switzer did. this is a different Oklahoma team, a team, again, that finished the season
and
6
South Carolina beat the snot out of them.
Yeah.
earlier.
Oh, they went into Norman and beat them over the head with a bag of hammers for 4 quarters. But that Alabama team, knowing what's on the line, it was late in the season. We knew what Oklahoma was and was not. But they go into Norman, only score 3 points, and they have 2 pick sixes. And they just get completely clobbered. And that's what kept them out. If they would have lost, say that was the loss was to LSU instead, I think Alabama's in. They just had too many bad losses. So, Rocky, I think what you say carries a lot of merit in terms of whether or not the Gamecocks get into the college football playoff. And thank you for the call as always. Always appreciate hearing from you.
Appreciate it. Have a good one.
Yeah, you're the man. But yeah, I mean there's a lot of merit to that, and I think there's a lot of emotional calluses that's been building with this program over the course of time too, and that's why I like the text we got earlier. Is Elijah, I'm a real Gamecock fan. Realistically, 8-4. I don't think that is irrational, and I think that just from a football standpoint, not even just a South Carolina historical standpoint, I think 8-4 is very reasonable. If anything, I wouldn't be surprised if that happened. And John K. texts in and says, we do this every year. Our O-line will either be decent or bad, 8 or 9 wins, depending on our O-line. Now, I guess to that, John, I totally understand the emphasis is a better word. The emphasis on the offensive line, because that obviously it's what kept the 23 team from being bowl eligible. Like that 23 team outside the offensive line, even with some of the defensive struggles they had, I think was good enough to get themselves in a position where they could play in a bowl game. But it was so bad that it kept your offense from reaching its potential. So I understand that, John. I absolutely understand that. But if I'm going to play devil's advocate here, I think this is a year that you should feel better about the offensive line because of you have the stalwart left tackle. Lenoris's blind side will be protected because I am very high on what Josiah Thompson did over the course of the year. Last season, I think he truly developed into being a left tackle that you can rely on to keep your quarterback safe. I love the additions that you brought into the transfer portal. I think Boaz Stanley is a name that we're going to be really familiar with come season time because of how great he was in his last year at Troy and how multifaceted he is. Like, more than likely, he will start the year as the starting center, but he's played games at right guard and left guard. And he's played all over the offensive line in his career, so you can maybe move him around in different spots if you feel like that's necessary. So, your point of emphasis on the offensive line, very well placed. But I think out of all the years in the last 5 or 6, I think this is the best we can feel about the offensive line going into the season. And that's one of the reasons why I feel confident that the offense will be better than the 24th best offense in the country, which is where Bill Connolly's SP Plus metric has them sitting right now. I think the floor is about 24-25, right? Another texter comes in and says, double-digit wins is the dream, but just be relevant and in the conversation with no blowout losses. Being in every game is the goal. 8-4 is realistic. Thanks, Chad. Yeah, thank you, Chad, for chiming in on the Firehouse Subs text line. Yeah, I mean, I don't expect them to get blown out. At this point, you have the veteran quarterback who is a star in this sport right now. You got the best edge rusher in college football. The offensive line, I think, is solidified. We won't truly know until toe meets leather. I get that. But you think you have the framework of a team that is good enough to be in every game they play. And I know you want to obviously win 9-10 games, but the SEC is so loaded, and who knows? Maybe Ole Miss is ahead of schedule. Maybe Alabama's run game is elite, and Ty Simpson doesn't have to be really good. I don't expect the running game to be elite, but let's just say they make that jump. Then that makes the Alabama game significantly harder. Let's say Oklahoma improves by leaps and bounds because John Mateer at quarterback was everything that they expected him to be coming from Washington State, and they have enough weapons around him to have a dangerous offense. That makes a ton of sense. That can make things a lot harder. So 8-4 is certainly realistic. Harv says if Sellers is competing for the Heisman, then we will get in if we're on the borderline. Harv, I mean, I can't argue with that at all. If you're on the borderline and you have a quarterback that's that good, in the minds of the committee, if you're 9-3 and you're on the cusp, it might be good enough to get you in. Thank you guys for your participation on our Firehouse Subs text line. We'll take a quick break, and we'll round out today's show with Elijah versus the internet. And all I got to say, bring it. Final segment of today's show here on the Postgame Show. I'm Elijah Campbell. There was no Jay Phillips today, but thanks to Michael Sauls for hanging out with me earlier from the state newspaper at MC Sauls on Twitter. Joined me in studio. His first time in the studio. We got to hang out with him for about the first hour of the show, so highly recommend going back and listening to that and watching it on our YouTube page. Some good discussion there, talking South Carolina softball, football, the college football playoff, a 9-game SEC schedule. So if you missed it, highly recommend going back and watching us discuss it earlier in the show. And it's time now for me to take on the internet. A more formidable opponent, considering our friend Jay Phillips went into yesterday's show at 7-17. However, to update you on how Jay has done, he did get correct that the Panthers would beat the Hurricanes. And he did get correct that the Braves-Phillies on today's first game of the doubleheader would go over. The Phillies won 5-4, and 9 runs is over 7.5. So an 0-for-3 day for the internet. You guys on yesterday's polls, for the first time this year, going over. So that makes the internet against Jay 14-13, and that improves Jay to 9-18 in the contest with him. But against me, you guys are 2-4, a little under 500, and I'm at 3-3. So I didn't expect to be doing a show by myself for a while and participating, so I was taking that victory lap pretty seriously. But now I got to get back to work. So today, we have 3 events here, starting with Knicks and Pacers. The Knicks are favored by 4.5 points. The internet, with 57% of the vote, goes Knicks minus 4.5. And I will take that challenge because I think the Pacers either win it tonight or they lose in heartbreaking fashion. Because when these two teams play, we get a lot of close games. I think there's some leeway. I could see the Knicks squeaking this thing out by 2-3 points. And I can also see the Pacers going in there and dropping the hammer on New York as well, because Tyrese Halliburton has turned himself into a superstar in this playoff run alone. Look, the last time out, 32 points, 15 assists, 12 rebounds with 0 turnovers. It's one of the more impressive stat lines I have seen in the NBA. Ooh, we had a split. For the first time, we have just made some history. For the first time, we have, for one of the polls, a 50-50 tie. Stars and Oilers. Who wins Game 5 tonight in Dallas between the Stars and Oilers? Half the votes went to the Stars. Half of them went to the Oilers. And the only way that I think that we can break this tie, and this is something I've had in mind for a while, so I'm not just arbitrarily making this up, but I do have a 1964 penny in my right hand, honor code. I'm going to put this up to the screen here. That is a penny. Heads, it is going to be the Stars. Tails, it is Oilers. Stars, it is. So the Stars will be the internet's pick. I never thought I'd have to use the coin flip until now, but I'm also picking the Stars. So it is not totally consequential in that way. And then lastly, who will score the most points tonight between Tyrese Halliburton, Pascal Siakam, Karl-Anthony Towns, and Jalen Brunson? Had a lot of fun with that last time because all 4 of those guys scored at least 24 points. 3 of them went for over 30. But 56% of you say Jalen Brunson, and I can't help but agree. I'm also going with Jalen Brunson just because I think the Knicks are going to rely on him heavily, especially if Karl-Anthony Towns isn't 100% health-wise. I know he's questionable, but I seriously think he's going to play. I'll go Jalen Brunson as well. Again, thanks to Michael for joining me in the first hour. Thank you guys for calling and texting in. I'll talk to you all tomorrow. Same time, same place. See you then.